This video is sponsored by Canon. If you're a creative in the local church, you're well aware of the unique challenges you face when it comes to creating high-quality video and photos for your ministry. When I consider the various use cases for creative tools in the church, I think of a communications department when you have to create photos and videos for your church website. I think of a creative department where you're making short films, maybe for bumper videos, or you want to create amazing graphics to utilize in your production design. And finally, I'm also reminded of the broadcast production environment where you're capturing high quality footage in real time and sending it online to your congregation. And since the local church has these various applications for a creative tool like a camera, it can be very difficult deciding on which camera is right for all of these various applications. So then it's really easy to buy just a photo camera for photography applications, maybe a cinema camera for your creative applications, and then maybe a broadcast camera for your broadcast and streaming applications. But what if there was one camera that could actually do it all? In this video, we're gonna take an in-depth look at the Canon R5C, and we're gonna explore the question, is this the ultimate hybrid camera for churches? Not only will you learn how this camera can be used in a photography, cinematic, and broadcast environment, but we're also gonna show you practical tips for speccing it out with the right accessories for various use cases, and we're gonna show you how to make the most of your photos and your footage in post-production. And best of all, you're gonna see how using a tool like this is accessible even for those of you who do not consider yourself professional photographers or videographers. You can leverage this tool for your local church. The first thing that jumps out to me about this camera is how it is truly a hybrid camera. So when you turn it on for the first time, you'll see you have to choose between video or photo mode. When you turn it on and you're in video mode, as I navigate the menus and the display, I feel like I'm using a Canon C300 Mark III or C500 Mark II or C70. It feels like a true Canon cinema camera. And then when I switch over to photo mode, it takes a few seconds for it to switch over to that mode. But when I'm in photo mode, it feels like it's just a photo camera. And this is a big deal. When you're trying to find a camera that can fulfill multiple purposes at your church for communications, creative filmmaking, or for a broadcast scenario, you don't want to have to mess around with unnecessary menus and settings for a purpose that you're not using at that given time. I also think it makes the camera more user-friendly. Let's say you have a volunteer photography team and their job is just to take photos. Or maybe you have someone who's running the camera for your church's live stream and they are just in video mode. There are so many amazing videos out there that go deep into the technical specifications of this camera. I'm not going to cover all of those here, but I do want to highlight a few of the things that I am personally excited about. First, the camera has a full frame sensor, which is going to be very important, especially when you're working in a low light environment, which is very common in a church's worship auditorium. So whether you're shooting a photo or video, you're not going to need a ton of light to produce a great image. The other great thing about having a full frame sensor is that you're going to be able to produce a beautiful depth of field to those images. Right now, you're seeing this video shot on the Canon 50mm RF lens with a 1.2 aperture. And having that lens wide open creates this nice creamy background. It really separates the subject from the background. It's what is going to give it that cinematic or professional look. And the fact that this camera, when it's in video mode, can shoot up to 8K videos in a RAW codec, that is mind-blowing. My personal preference for a video codec that I'm gonna be using on this camera, and we are using right now, is XF AVC at 10-bit. It gives us plenty of color information and dynamic range to capture what we need and to be able to edit it and grade it properly in post. But maybe you have some sort of filmmaking project for your church that is really demanding and you're capturing a shot somewhere where afterwards you're just gonna need that control in post-production to adjust the highlights and shadows of the image or change the color of the image without introducing noise and artifacts. In that case, that's when you're gonna wanna try out the RAW Lite or the RAW standard codecs. Another cool video recording mode I like is being able to go to the slow and fast motion option. So I can go in here and I can record all the way up to 120 frames per second at 4K. And again, maybe you're trying to capture some really dramatic cinematic footage that you can use in a sermon series video or promotional video. This camera can do it all. And then when you're in photo mode, of course, you can capture both RAW and JPEG photos. I'm a fan of capturing in RAW. It gives me so much ability to be able to adjust the exposure and color of that image in post. And the full frame sensor can capture 45 megapixel images. And you're definitely not going to have any issue getting images that are plenty clear to post anywhere online, or if you need to blow up images for some sort of large format publishing that you're going to do, maybe you need to blow things up onto a poster for inside your church. It's not going to be a problem with the images that you can capture on this camera. This camera also has Canon's dual pixel autofocus, so as I move closer to you, I'm in focus. As I move back, you can see it's tracking my eye. It's super important to have great autofocus, especially for run and gun video and photography. Let's talk about lenses. Of course, Canon is known for their wide variety of both RF and EF lenses. RF lenses are built to work with the new R5C because it's got the RF lens mount built into it. It's got all of the latest technology that comes with these RF lenses, so it's gonna look great, and you get the additional features like using this control ring here for different exposure settings. But let's say your church does have a lot of older Canon glass, like the EF mount glass. You can easily get the adapter here to go from EF to the RF mount. And this will also allow you to use any of the high-end cinema lenses that Canon also has with that EF mount. The 24-105 f4 lens that this comes with is a really versatile lens, and I think it could work really well in the life of your church as a good walk-around lens as you're walking through the lobby, if you're getting shots in the worship center. It's gonna be just a really great walk-around lens. But if you're gonna try to get shots of people on stage like pastors, worship leaders, band members, I would get a 70-200. I would recommend the RF lens mount version of that. So again, you're not having to add on the additional adapter that I have on this EF lens. For general filmmaking and creative projects, I would look to use this 35mm prime lens. It has f1.8 for the aperture, and then the lens that we're shooting this video on right now, the 50mm f1.2 prime lens with the RF mount. Let's talk about how we're using the R5C in a live streaming context here at South Fellowship. This is a very basic way to integrate this camera into a live streaming environment. When it comes to live streaming at your church, a few things you want to consider when it comes to the camera is make sure you can output 1080p video, and preferably in this environment, we're using 2997 or 30 frames per second. And in some environments, you can also use 24 frames per second. In this environment, we're outputting 1080p at 30 frames per second, and we are using the micro HDMI port on the R5C. And this cable is then running to our converter, which goes from HDMI to SDI. And then the SDI cable runs all the way to the video switcher in the tech booth. So that's how we're getting the video footage from the R5C to the video switcher. Another thing to consider in a live streaming environment is having a power source. So the R5C has a great feature where it's got a USB-C port that can actually provide power to the camera. So I have a battery in there. If for some reason this did get disconnected, the camera would be able to remain on, and this port actually charges the battery as well. And this is then just plugged into the wall. We like to use smart outlets here at South Fellowship, so we can actually use remote software to turn on and off power that's supplied to this camera. This particular position in our camera plot is getting a nice side angle of the front platform of the worship leaders and of the pastor. And it's easy for us to just walk up to this camera tripod during the service if we have to adjust framing or focus. And with this particular shot, I like how we get that depth of field effect where the subject is in focus using this nice 70 to 200 lens, but then the background is all blurred out. It looks really great. Within the camera settings itself, like I said, we're just running it at 1920 by 1080p MP4 codec. I'm actually not even recording to the camera, but I could easily record to the SD card or CF Express card. And then I also have the standard Rec 709 LUT applied to this camera. What's great about being able to apply the Rec 709 LUT to the R5C is it makes it very easy to match color with the rest of the cameras that we're using in this setup. So we have 3 other Canon cameras. We're using the CRN 500, that's the 1-inch sensor PTZ camera, and then we have 2 CRN 300 cameras. That's the smaller version of that camera. They give us plenty of perspectives around the room. And again, because it's all Canon sensors and color science, they all look great together. We have the Canon RC IP100 here that allows me to select a camera and then go ahead and start moving it around the room. So it's just really easy for our video operators to get the shots that they need. And then we have our video switching control right here. I can easily bounce around to different camera angles for our live stream. So this is the R5C showing up in my multi-view. Like I said, we're just setting that signal from the camera over SDI into the video switcher. My friend Rob at Brave Church even did a latency test on how long it takes for the video signal to get out of the R5C to get to the video switcher, and he said it only has a latency of 2 frames. So that's super low latency. You're not going to notice any sync issues. All the cameras and all the angles that we're seeing come into our video switcher, everything's coming in at the right time. Of course, the video switcher adds some latency, so we're able to delay our audio to sync everything up before it's sent online. But even if you were to use the R5C in an iMag context and put the image onto large screens in your church, it has little enough latency to also work for that context as well. So out of the box, it's easy to turn on your R5C, make sure you have a CFast or SD card in there, and you can start making videos. But if you're gonna take it to the next level of professional cinematography, I'd encourage you to consider building out your own camera rig, complete with a cage, as well as maybe another microphone, monitor, external battery. There's all sorts of accessories that you can dive into. And I don't have one of those rigs on hand with me, and to be honest, I'm not that much of a camera nerd to build one out. But I did find someone, Rob McTavish, the production director at Brave Church in Denver. They've been using the R5C for a lot of their creative videos at Brave Church. He's a huge fan of the camera. He's been using it for almost a year now, and he's gonna be able to walk you through how to spec out a really great handheld rig for this camera.
My name is Rob McTavish. I'm the production director at Brave Church here in Englewood, Colorado. I oversee all of live production for audio, video, and lighting. Spend primarily most of my time at our main broadcast campus, but I also oversee a lot of the creative side of our production team as well, outside of live. My experience is more in the live environment, but I also, in this position, I oversee what we do in post-production as well. I would say that this has been about 8 months now, is when I actually got my hands on this, and shortly thereafter I started to configure it and rig it out in a way that it could be a very portable rig, but also I've torn it apart and used it on gimbal as well. But when I was building this out, the thing that I started with first was the cage. I wanted to be able to have a protective cage around the camera, but also something that would allow me the flexibility to have a number of mounting points. And what I mean by mounting points is like I wanted to be able to have a top handle to carry it. I also wanted the ability to add a mic on here to get reference audio. Most of the time I'm gonna mic somebody up, but I want to have reference audio maybe to capture the room. The other thing I wanted to be able to do is like I have a grip on my right side, but like what do I have for the left side? So I bought this solution where I can have stability if I am shooting like I am right now. But let's say if I wanted to shoot really, really low and I want to use my top handle, but I also want another point of contact, I can push this button and tilt it. And now I can stand up and I can hold it from the top down. The other thing too is that knowing that it has a USB-C port that I want to use and a mini, I believe it's the mini HDMI, I wanted to safeguard that. And so I wanted to be able to get a cage, and there's a number of cages that you can get that allow you to add on this additional feature here that allows you to plug those in and then lock them. And so that's going to protect your port. If I want to move my monitor, I have flexibility of moving it to different mounting points on here, but I didn't want the camera to be toppling over or tilting forward or tilting back. I wanted it to be very, very stable. And so part of Kessler's product, and I love their quick release products, but they have these adapters. I believe they're called the K plates. I could be wrong, but it's part of the K plate product line. But in that, it has the rubber feet, and you can put whatever size rails you want on it. And I put one on the back and I put one on the front. So that way when I set the camera down, I don't have to worry about it falling over. In part of the design, I wanted to be able to access the screen that's already built onto the camera, but I also wanted to take advantage of the V-mount battery to power it. And I was like, how can I do that? So I found this where I can actually loosen this up and I can tilt it back, and now I can access my on-screen monitor, and then I can move it back up and lock it back down. So it gives me the flexibility to use both monitors, as well as I can swap the V-mount battery. And as I was sharing before, I can actually, if you watch this, I can unplug the USB-C. I don't lose any signal. It's not going to stop recording. I can detach the V-mount battery, and then I can reinstall it pretty simply and then plug it back in. But overall, I really like it. It gives you a lot of stability. It gives you a lot of options to shoot and how you want to handle it when you're shooting. You can even turn this, and you can rest your arm on it when you're shooting. Lots of flexibility and mobility at the same time. For Kodaks, like coming into the menu, a lot of times, if I'm just trying to get it really quickly, I will shoot, and I'm going into the color picture profile, I'll shoot 709 wide dynamic range, but it also has Canon log 3. So I'm typically shooting between either 709 wide dynamic range or Canon log 3 for grading. Although I like the idea that it has HDR, PQ, and HLG as well. There's always been this challenge of what cameras are appropriate for use in the live environment. If I were to be looking at using this Sunday, I would potentially look at the option of mounting the Teradek in the back along with a V-mount on the Teradek, so I can V-mount my battery to it. And then all of that just passes through for power. I come off of this USB-C to power the camera, and then I would still have the ability to use my handheld here or my handheld here, and not have to get the Teradek in the way of it being normally where you'd place it is on top of the camera where the handle is. But a lot of times that's not realistic unless you're shooting with a tripod or if you're holding this camera in this position. But a lot of times when you're shooting, especially if you're going to be a mobile camera on the stage, when you get low and you shoot through the drum kit, you don't want to have something blocking the ability to have your hand here. So I could see it as being built out as V-mount Teradek rail system, and then this configuration right here. I really do like the RF lenses. And part of the reason I like the RF lenses is because they have an additional ring on them, which can be assignable. So a lot of times when I'm wanting to shoot in a shallow depth of field, I want to be able to keep my aperture at a fixed aperture. And so like, let's say if I'm shooting f2.8, but then I need to increase or decrease the ISO, I can actually assign it to this ring here. And I can turn the ring and adjust just my ISO, and I'm not having to use all these dials on my camera here. The other thing you can buy is you can buy an adapter that goes from RF to EF, and you can use all your EF lenses. You can throw this on, and it doesn't have any glass in between it. It's actually just adapting from your RF mount to your EF mount. You can also buy the adapter that has the ring built into it. So not only can you adapt, you can also use that ring with EF lenses. You can assign it to your shutter speed, your ISO, your aperture, whatever you like that ring to be. That's fully customizable, which I think is really nice. The other thing you do is you can buy an adapter that has RF to EF, and it has a drop-in variable ND filter. So if you want to have a solution where you can control your ND when you're outdoors or even inside and your lighting changes, you can do that all in camera as well. So it's great. You can use your current EF ecosystem for all your lenses. And then if you want to adapt and grow into RF lenses, you have all that flexibility.
Dylan and I were talking earlier about with this camera, it's hard to take a bad photo, which is great. Again, if you have someone who's not really a photography geek or nerd, you just want to give them a great camera that's going to perform well. You can maybe dial in some basic settings for them and then just let them run with it and have some fun. So I want you to hear from Teresa, who's the communications director here at South Fellowship Church. We gave her the R5C to start using to take photos of life at the church and during worship to be able to publish on social media and the church website.
With communication, it covers a lot of different roles in the church, mostly marketing and the website and things like that. For photography, I have a team of volunteer photographers that do the bulk of it, but it's also been great to have a camera that I can just pick up and run with on Sundays, or if there's an event that I'm at. It's been really simple just to plug in and just get all of the shots that we need and throw them in Lightroom and upload them to the website. I love that we can go from the lobby that we have at South that has a lot of natural light and get some great shots there, and then go straight into the sanctuary, the worship center, that has a lot of different lighting, but honestly, I've just been using it with the autofocus. I don't have a background with photography, so I love that I don't have to mess with a bunch of dials and get everything set up just right. I'm able to focus just by clicking on the screen, and it takes shots perfectly. It does everything. It's so simple. So these were some that I took in the worship center when we were, I think this was second service, we were doing worship. So it just shows up so great. I love the autofocus, and the lighting was just wonderful. So I've been using these for our website. I use them on social. I will use them a lot for our graphics. Something that we really try and do for any of our marketing is make sure that we're not using stock photos. We really want to show our people, and being able to use this camera at all these different events really makes it look and feel like our community, which I love. It's been great, and I love that the zoom is so high quality that I don't have to get up in people's faces when they're worshiping or talking with their friends and family. It can be really easy to just stand far back and still get a really great tight shot.
So we actually want to show you guys what it's like working with the still photos and the footage that you can capture with this camera. Right now it's a Sunday morning, and Dylan, who's behind the camera, spent all morning capturing a ton of photos and video footage. We also went up into the mountains a little bit here in Colorado to get some outdoor shots as well. And we're going to walk you through what it's like working with the raw photos as well as taking the footage and working with it. So go ahead and take it away, Dylan.
Hey guys, I'm going to show you how we took the C-Log footage that we captured on this trip and turned it into the final product that you see here. I'm not going to go into great detail about why I'm doing each thing that I'm doing. If you just follow these steps, I promise you'll get a great outcome. If you do want to know the why behind each little thing, I recommend looking up on YouTube. There's a ton of great tutorials out there. So diving into this project here, you can see I took a slow-mo of Jake in the woods here. I really like the way this clip turned out, those leading lines that the trees naturally made down this path. It's just a great cinematic look, and this footage that this camera captured is just incredible. So you'll notice when you throw your C-Log footage into a project that it's pretty flat. It looks kind of grayscale. So simply put, there's two main steps to coloring. There's color correction and then color grading. Color correction is when we correct the color in the data that we've captured. And color grading is how the filmmaker expresses the emotion that they want you to feel, whether that's an emotion brought by the environment around the character or it's artificially inserted by the filmmaker. So you can see here I've added an adjustment layer onto this footage. I just went to Google and downloaded an adjustment layer, and then I dropped it into my titles folder. You can see it's up here in my titles folder. Next thing I did was I went to my effects tab and I searched for a color wheel. I dropped it in. Then I put 2 custom LUT tabs underneath it. The order you do this in will affect the final product, so I recommend doing a color wheel, a custom LUT, and then another. So the first thing we're gonna do is we are going to open our color and effects workspace. And essentially what this is showing us is all of the data that this clip has captured. You can see all the different waveforms, the vector scope, the luma, all the light that's coming in. It's a lot of mumbo jumbo that I'm not gonna go into. So think of it as we're gonna take this really compressed line of light and we are going to try and expand it a little bit and get that dynamic range that this camera captured for us. The first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna convert this image from C-Log to a Rec 709 image. So that's why we have this custom LUT here. All you need to do is go online and get a free log to Rec 709 conversion LUT and download that into your LUTs folder. After you do that, in this drop-down menu, you will see the LUT that you have installed. So now this image has been converted to Rec 709. Now we're gonna do what's called the correction. So our main focus here is correcting skin tones if they need to be corrected and expanding our dynamic range here. So I'm gonna go to my color wheel and I'm gonna go to my global wheel here. I'm gonna lift it quite a bit and it's gonna seem drastic at first, but that's okay. And the next thing we're gonna do is go down to our shadows. And we're gonna take our shadows and we're gonna do what's called crushing the shadows. Now you'll notice in film that the shadows aren't actually crushed below 0. We don't wanna do that. You'll notice in a lot of modern movies that even in the shadows, even in the dark spots of the film, you can still see the detail. And so that's kind of our goal here, especially with all these leaves. There's a lot of dark shadows that still have detail that we really wanna retain there. I don't want to bring that any lower really. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my highlights and do the opposite. I'm going to bring our highlights. You can see back here in this image, there's a lot of highlights coming through these trees, hitting Jake's face here, hitting his arm, and then also kind of backlighting back here on these trees. So I'm going to bring these highlights up I'm just going to bring them up quite a bit. I actually kind of like the way that skin tone turned out. It's a little bit cool. But it was a cloudy, rainy day. When you're color correcting, you want to take into account the environment, the atmosphere, and ultimately the final emotion that you're wanting to convey. And you'll notice that this clip was used in the intro. I wanted like a cool, epic looking intro. I wanted to make Jake look like Batman or something. So I want this to be kind of moody and dark. And so I'm not gonna overdo it on the highlights, but I am gonna bring them up, and I'm also not gonna change much of those skin tones yet. And I'm actually going to take the global and bring it up just a little bit more, because once we apply our grading LUT and we start doing color grading, it's going to make the image darker. So this is the part where you get to have a little fun and throw some artistic flair in there, depending on whatever emotion you're trying to convey or whatever the subject matter is for this film. So there's a ton of filmmakers out there who sell custom LUTs. Some are good, some are bad, but I have found some that I really, really like. And so I dropped that in here, and then I'm going to apply that LUT. And you can see immediately it turned into a very moody, kind of dramatic, more cool temperature looking shot. And it really fits what we're looking for, because that was a dark, cloudy, rainy day, and the final product I'm shooting for is kind of an epic slow motion shot here. I really like this one. It's called Nolan Blue, kind of referring to Christopher Nolan. Christopher Nolan's pretty known for his really dramatic, deep blues. And so this is the part where we're gonna do some final changes. I do want to lift his skin tones just a hair. It's a little bit too cool. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go to my midtones and I'm gonna push it into the orange just a hair. And you can see that that really brought out Jake's skin tone just a hair. Overall, this image, I really do like it. I want it to be kind of dark. Obviously, what's cool about C-Log or log footage in general is that I can, if I want to, change the vibe of this whole shot. I could lift this global even more. I could bring those shadows down even more. I could bring those midtones up or down depending on what I'm shooting for here. And then boom, you have a great final image that really conveys the mood that you're looking for. And so this is more of a classic blue and orange look, where you can see that the blues really pop, his skin tone really pops. It's more of a contrasty kind of look. And for most of the videos that you see on this channel, I'm actually using a more blue and orange type of LUT, and I'm not mixing it at 100%. I actually mix it more towards 9, and I actually really like that look too. So that is also a really usable shot. And so it's as simple as that. You can really get a lot out of this log footage and shape the final image into whatever you want it to be. So let's move on to the photo side of things. I highly recommend shooting in RAW anytime you're taking photos for the same reason that I recommend shooting in log when you're taking video. This first photo is a photo I took of Jake when we were up in the mountains. I really love the detail in this photo. You can see that, man, that autofocus just really nailed it. But let me show you the original. Not as great. I kind of overdid it on the highlights. I was a little overexposed here. I don't know, my skin tones might be a little off. It wasn't the perfect photo. So I'm gonna show you how I went from this to this step by step. So first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna go up here to our presets. Now, when it comes to presets, just like with LUTs, it's a starting point only. You can't just throw a preset onto a photo and expect it to be good. But I knew I really wanted to convey that moody kind of feel, so I'm gonna go with a black and white. I'm gonna use this one called Black Kraken. I really love this one. It's gonna immediately convert that into an Adobe monochrome photo. You can see here, profile Adobe monochrome. It automatically detected that. Pretty good. My highlights are still a little overexposed there. So what I'm gonna do, and you can see here, it also applied a custom S-curve here. So first thing I'm noticing is I would like to bring this shadow here next to Jake's eye up a little bit. I'd like to see his eye a little more. So I'm gonna take this exposure. This is exposing the overall photo. I'm gonna bring it up a hair. That's probably good. The next thing I notice is that it's way too blown out up here on the sky. And so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take these highlights, I'm gonna bring them down. I'm also gonna take my whites and bring those down quite a bit. And I like that a lot more. It's really given this nice bokeh effect back here. I can still see the detail in Jake's eye behind the camera, despite the fact that there was really no light here. Now, I'm going to fix this crop that I had, 4x5. Let's say we're posting to Instagram today, and so I'm gonna take a 4x5. I'm going to bring it in a hair. Using the rule of thirds, I'm gonna put his eye near that left quadrant there. I do want to give him a little more headroom, and boom, there we go. This next photo I took is of Jake's wife Kaylee playing the keys on a Sunday morning. Really like the way this one turned out, but let me show you what the original looked like. So there's the original. I definitely overexposed this one, but I'm gonna show you how I salvaged this and turned it into this, because it is doable. So obviously our first priority is going to be bringing those highlights down. So the first thing I'm gonna do is bring our exposure down. And you can see that helps a ton, okay? We are losing some detail now in the shadows, but we have managed to salvage Kaylee's face there. So I'm gonna choose a preset that I think keeps the overall mood of the photo. And now that I've done that, I can get a better picture of what we're looking at here. Still a little overexposed in the highlights, so I can actually just bring the highlights themselves down a hair. And then I do wanna lift those shadows just a little bit more. I'm actually gonna bring the overall exposure up until her face starts clipping. And then I'm gonna bring those highlights down a little bit more. So now I'm gonna desaturate some of these blues. I'm gonna desaturate the yellow. I'm gonna desaturate the red. And then I'm gonna play with the overall white balance temperature a hair. And then I'm gonna add some film grain and pull the vignette down so it's a little more focused, not overdoing it. Then I'm gonna crop this photo in just a hair to focus it in on Kaylee as our subject. And then there we go. We have a final product that turned out really well compared to the original. So I know that was a lot of information to take in all at once. Hopefully you guys got something out of that. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know in the comments, and let's get back to the video.
I want to touch on a few features about this camera that I wish were different. The first one being that micro HDMI port. I wish it did just have a full-size HDMI port on it, because that's what you're using most of the time when you're connecting HDMI devices to the camera, especially in a live streaming context as you send that signal to your switcher. It's not a huge deal breaker though, because you can obviously just get the appropriate cable to make that conversion from micro HDMI to regular HDMI. The other thing I'd like to change is the battery life. It's not that great, but fortunately there are some solutions to this. If you put a single battery in the normal battery compartment, you'll just notice you're not gonna get an insane amount of battery life, especially if you do compare it to some other comparable mirrorless cameras out there. But there are some other workarounds for this. Number one, if you are using it in a studio or in a church where you have the camera fixed in a stationary position, you can just supply power over a USB-C cable, or you can also use the power supply that Canon made specifically for the camera. The other solution is to get the battery grip, so you can have 2 batteries that are then attached to the camera, and that's obviously going to extend the battery life. And then finally, you could build out that more extensive handheld camera rig and actually have a V-mount battery. And as Rob showed you in this video, he was able to get like almost 9 hours of battery life with that battery setup. So there are solutions out there for extended battery life. Just be prepared to make that additional investment in the battery grip or other accessories. The other major feature I wish this camera has was in-body image stabilization, or IBIS. A lot of other mirrorless video cameras have the feature, and it just makes it so easy for run and gun video work, especially to just have that really smooth handling of the camera, and it really smooths out the image and the little jitters that you usually create when you're holding the camera. Fortunately, a lot of the Canon lenses like this one here, the 24-105, has stabilization built into the lens, and you can still add the digital stabilization in the camera. The Canon EOS R5C is an incredible hybrid camera, perhaps the best hybrid camera option out there for churches. And hopefully by now, at the end of this video, you're not just taking my word for it, but you've seen the results for yourself, and you've seen how other users at other churches are getting incredible results with this photo and video camera. To learn more about this camera, check out the links below the video to pick one up for your church. I can't wait to hear about how you're leveraging this creative tool for your worship ministry. And a big thank you to Canon for supporting the channel and sponsoring this video. If you guys found it helpful, leave a like, share it with your friends, and we'll see you next time.